Hello, everyone. Welcome to the live stream, our third of the week. Wow, getting to be a habit. Well, it's a lot of fun interfacing with everyone. And welcome to the live stream, as I say, from wherever you are around the world, whatever time zone you're in. I hope it's not too much of a sweat to be listening to this now. And indeed, if you're going to be listening to it retrospectively, podcast form. Don't forget, we do put all our live streams, cam chats, and race summaries out on our podcast platform, which you can obviously download, and that's wherever you get your favorite podcasts. What they're always saying, isn't it? I'm not quite sure what that means, but it's definitely on Apple and Amazon and Spotify. So yeah, don't forget that. And here we are in the build-up to the Hungarian Grand Prix. I need to just check actually the latest weather for Budapest, because I've been looking through some of the team previews. None of them are saying rain on Sunday, but let's just have a look and see what it says here on mine anyway. Go to Budapest. And it's still predicting, well, it's now cloud. Saturday and Sunday are cloudy and there's no more storm clouds, whereas yesterday there were storm clouds for both days. So it is quite changeable. That's the latest prediction. It's going to be a tough race in many ways. It's Hungary's a great circuit. I love it, love it. Great for spectators, wonderful atmosphere there, Budapest, the whole thing. It's a tough circuit, lots of tight corners, qualifying critical, like Monaco and the other tight circuits, very difficult to overtake. But it's going to be, if it's hot, it's always a very tough circuit in terms of physical effort for the drivers. Although I was looking back, I mean, there's quite a lot of talk about this is the big 40th for the Hungarian Grand Prix, started in 1985. I was there for that race and 86, well, thereafter really. And going back, looking back at the stats then, it's amazing. They were in the dry and it was almost a 2-hour race. I mean, 86, it was 1 hour, 59 minutes and it was in the dry. And of course the track has changed quite a lot. It's a quicker track now overall. It was a slower track then. Lap distance isn't that different, but in order to shorten the time, it's now a 70 lap race, and it was a 73 lap race back in 76 lap race back in 86. Can you believe that? Amazing, isn't it? Still basically the Hungaroring, but they raced for 76 laps. Like looking at the old Monaco stats and saying, oh, they did 100 laps at Monaco back in the 60s and the 50s for that matter. So yeah, a different sort of circuit. The tyres are going to be pretty much what you'd expect. Soft, slow circuit, soft stuff from Pirelli, but they obviously are nervous about temperatures. Can be very, very hot. It looks like Friday, Saturday, when the track is going to be rubbered in. There'll be a bit of graining and stuff on Friday for sure. But the track will rubber in by the weekend, and then it looks as if that they may be in luck because there'll be quite a lot of cloud cover at best. There may be some rain, as we just said, but cloud cover for sure, and that will definitely be a good thing from a Pirelli point of view, because it is a tough circuit in terms of temperatures, and they are going pretty soft. Not as soft as they could go with the soft, but almost there. Pretty dramatic. There'll be a lot of talk about the history of this race over the weekend, I think, and the amount of work that the Hungarians have done at the track on the pit complex, the pit lane resurfacing, a lot of jet black tarmac there, and lots of great new construction at the circuit, which is wonderful to see, and huge crowd. There was a huge crowd for the first race. I think it was 200,000 actually. I remember 85, 86 it was. And it was, I said 85 before, I meant 86, sorry. 86, and it was a massive crowd. And from memory, a lot of it came over from across the border, if that's the right word. The other side of the Iron Curtain, in other words. And I remember landing at the airport for the first time, and it was then an Eastern Bloc country, wasn't it? I think, something like that. Anyway, it was... the airport was very Eastern Bloc, lots of DC-3s and troop carriers everywhere. And it was quite quaint that the city itself wasn't that crowded, and there were lots of old cafes, what you would imagine Budapest to be like. And it was, of course, only when the walls came down that McDonald's appeared and litter suddenly happened in the street and the whole thing changed. And imagine now what it's like. I mean, it's just going to be one huge F1 fest all weekend, I imagine. But I don't want the history of this race to forget one guy who actually, in many ways, is more important than anything we've been celebrating this year, because here's the plaque near the circuit. Ferencváros, they've got the surname first there. And basically, he's the winner of the first ever Grand Prix, the 1906 French Grand Prix. Sartre, Le Mans, in other words, street race at Le Mans. And it's very easy to walk past that. There's a statue as well of him by what doesn't look like a Grand Prix car, actually, of any that he drove. But anyway, it looks a bit like a go-kart or something. It's a bit odd. But nonetheless, it's there. And I just hope that when people walk past that, they don't just, look away, because this guy was incredibly important in terms of shaping the way we went about our motor racing. Because Ferencváros was a mechanic engineer from Hungary and desperately wanted to get involved with the manufacture of road cars and this whole new era that was beginning, this incredible invention, and also love racing, and that showed up in everything he did. So he actually went to France and got a job with the Renault factory, working as a mechanic at the Renault factory, building the cars, and managed to cajole the Renault brothers into giving him a few test drives. And he was very quick. So they said, oh, well, you can do a few races. And sure enough, he went off and won the 1906 French Grand Prix, which is the first ever Grand Prix in the history of the sport. And I think it's wonderful that a guy like Ferenc from Hungary was the winner of that first race, because he wasn't a wealthy gentleman buying a car and cruising around. He was a racer in the sort of, dare I say it with the moustache, in the Nigel Mansell mold. He had nothing. And he went over there and he created a career for himself because he loved motor racing. And that's a great picture of him, actually, isn't it? It's you can see there. I mean, looks, obviously it's old-fashioned, but you can see the glint in his eyes and how much he loves his racing. And it's a great story, the Ferencváros story. And I hope it's captured by Formula One this weekend. Yeah, right. Anyway, here's a picture of him, another lovely picture. This is actually the 1907 French Grand Prix, held at Dieppe rather than Le Mans, but a similar car, the Renault, which was a sort of lightweight mega car as well. All credit to the Renault brothers for the car they produced there. And he actually finished second in that race. So he had a first in 1906 and then a second in 1907. And he was just a great driver, great guy, great driver. And as I say, he kind of set the mold for young drivers today who have nothing but burning ambition. And it's a great, I was going to say a great lesson, but it's actually a great name and a great figure to have as you're walking into the Hungarian circuit, the Hungaroring, this weekend. So the only other picture I thought, well, there's that, and then this was the first race, 1986, and I was at Williams at that point. I think I took that picture actually. This was obviously Nigel and Nelson. Nelson being incredibly funny, isn't he? Classic Nelson Piquet. And Nigel looking, he knows what's going on. He's not amused. And Nelson actually won that first Hungarian Grand Prix. A good win for Nelson because he had a battle with Ayrton. And he passed him. It was a classic pass on the outside of the first corner. A bit of a slide going on as well. And that was great. And the interesting thing is that both of them were sort of intersecting in their careers at that point, because Ayrton at that point had decided to have no more at Lotus and would switch. Well, he would continue, but he would switch in his mind to going to McLaren for 88. And Nelson would be annoyed and very fed up with Williams already in 86. So the two of them, the two Brazilians, were the sort of crossroads of where they were thinking of where they were going to go and looking at one another eye to eye going into that corner. And it was a good win. Nigel, the following year, of course, nearly won the 87 Hungarian Grand Prix and was leading it easily in the Williams Honda when a right rear wheel nut, would you believe, just spun loose. There were no pit stops in that race. Just spun loose and he lost the right rear wheel with victory in sight. Not the 6 laps that would have made the difference if it was today's race distance, but within sight of victory, easy victory. And the interesting thing about that, I think, is that if you think back to that 87 season, the previous race was the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. And in that race, he had a wheel vibration, had come in for new tyres and gone out and won the race, beaten Nelson and won the British Grand Prix. And it was a couple of days afterwards, I was talking to Patrick Head about this after this incident in Hungary when the right rear wheel nut came off. And he said, well, of course, if Nigel hadn't had that problem at Silverstone, hadn't come in for the new tyres, which obviously meant we re-torqued the wheel nuts when we put the new set on, then probably he would have had the wheel nut problem at Silverstone and it would have shown up. But it didn't show up until Hungary, because that was the first non-stop race they did with that sort of power going through the engine and those torque settings on the wheel nuts. And I can only assume that Nelson wasn't putting quite as much load through the car as Nigel, and that probably is the case. And after that, Williams went to higher torque numbers on the wheel nuts and the rear. So yeah, because of what happened at Silverstone, it was a great race for Nigel. Equally, because it was a great race for Nigel, he had that pit stop. Look what happened in Hungary. It's weird how things continue on, isn't it? My other memory of Hungary is 91, when I was there as team manager now, and we lost a steering wheel from Riccardo Patresi's car. He stopped, I think it was definitely Friday. He stopped quite early on. Something went wrong with the electronics, and he stopped by the side of the circuit. And when he came back when the car was brought back into the paddock area after practice, they didn't stop practice or anything like that in those days. When the car was brought back, Patrick said to Riccardo, "Where's the steering wheel?" And Riccardo said, "Well," I looked around, of course there was no steering wheel on the car. And he had to take the steering wheel off to get out of the car. And Riccardo had kind of then just walked away, I think. And that was it. He just parked the car and walked away and got a lift back into the paddock. And so, Patrick was obviously enraged, because in those days, a paddle shift steering wheel was basically a computer, and it was an incredibly expensive item to produce, a one-off item, let alone 3 or 4 of them for the race team. And so I was dispatched. I went to race control and managed to persuade them to go through all the closed-circuit TV footage that they had. There wasn't a lot of TV coverage of that Grand Prix, not as we have it today anyway. You couldn't just go down to the F1 TV compound. It didn't exist. It was sort of local Hungarian host broadcaster. They didn't have anything. So I went to the circuit organizers for the closed circuit TV, and sure enough, there was a picture of Riccardo pulling off, stopping by the side of the track, and the marshals pushing the car behind the guardrail, and Riccardo getting out of the car with the steering wheel. And then there was a picture in the frame of a marshal just grabbing the steering wheel, putting it in his bag. So sadly for that poor guy, I mean, he was obviously a fan as well as a marshal. We identified him, we got the steering wheel back, and I don't think he ever got, I don't think he was ever invited back to be a marshal at the Hungaroring again. So anyway, those are all my stories. But hats off to Ferenc Szisz. Let's not forget what he did for Hungary and Hungarian motor racing. Of course, there were Hungarian Grand Prix long before the Hungaroring in the 30s. We shouldn't forget that either. And actually in the 60s, there was a street race in Budapest for the European Touring Car Championship, which featured such drivers as John Whitmore in an Alan Mann Lotus Cortina, and he won it, I think he won it. And they went round the roundabout and back down the cobbled streets. It was a great thing. So there we are. Anyway, no more ado. Let's get on to your questions and answers. I'll make this a little bit shorter as well. I'm doing it more frequently, but shorter. And yeah, we'll see how we get on. Aleandra Durango, hello Alessandra, another of our regulars, thank you for joining us. Hi Peter, let's make a prediction. Who will go faster in Hungary between Oscar and Lando, Lewis and Charles, Behrman and Ocon? What a question with which to start, Alessandra. I don't think my brain's woken up yet. Right, between Oscar and Lando, I would say Lando on this occasion, for no reason other than that I can see him driving a really smooth, clean lap around Hungary for some reason. I don't know why, I just can. And he's good around those sorts of circuits, isn't he? So I think Lando might just be quicker than Oscar, but it'll be very close. Lewis and Charles, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say Lewis, because I think Lewis has been driving a little bit more like Lewis since Silverstone. And we saw glimpses of that at Spa in the dry, and then in the race, in the semi-wet, and then in the dry, in the race, using the front end more, a little bit more economic with his approaches and his transitions, just looking a little bit more like Lewis, not 100% there, and so yeah, let's do something different. We'll say Lewis on that one for the reasons I just said. Behrman and Ocon, that's a good one, isn't it? I'd say Ocon. I think Oliver's. I mean, I've got massive respect for Oliver Behrman. He's a really good driver in the George Russell mode. But I think Ocon's got slightly shorter corners, sort of Daniel Ricciardo-esque corners from Ocon. And I think he'll be quite economic around there. Anyway, they'll probably be all completely wrong, but thank you very much for putting me on the spot there, Alessandra. Didn't need that early on. Sash Sherman, another regular, thank you. Hello, Sash. These people, you good folk, all queue up before we go live, and I feel kind of bad for those that join and want to sort of be part of the conversation, because we tend not to get to too many of you unless you're, queued up in advance. But anyway, not much we can do about that. Sarosh Saman, hi Peter. In 2014, Vettel was unable to create a stable platform to rotate the car and also drive, and also power delivery issues with his Red Bull. But somehow he drives well in the wet. Appreciate your insight, please. Well, yeah, I mean, Vettel is quite unusual driver. Excuse me. Very nice. Bergamino coffee. He's the nearest to Vettel. He's a sort of softer version of Jean Alesi, and he's a short corner in the sense that the corner suits him and it's right, he loves to just V the corner and then do a slow rotation and V out. But but it's almost in a straight line, and that's why he only does it on specific corners. Whereas Max can do it with lots of curves going on, as can Charles and as could Lewis and can a little bit. But Vettel needed it to be more or less straight. And a good example of that corner, of a corner that suits Vettel really well, is the right-hander at the top of the hill in Barcelona. That, after the long straight, they go through the left-hand hairpin. Then that next long right, that's a really good corner where you can just V the corner. And Vettel's really good there, and other places too. And let's put all this into context. Vettel has incredible car control, incredible sensitivity, and great flair in terms of being a racing driver. So all of that's a given. I'm just talking tiny, tiny details. In 14, I think the problem was that in doing that, in that rotate, prior to 14, the Red Bull had a massive amount of downforce, particularly at the rear, and he was able to do a lot of that transition stuff, just boom like that, and just get the grip on exit. 14, the regulations changed. He didn't have that same downforce, and I think that's why he was then kind of stuck on an island, because he did it, all he'd done in his life is all this straight line stuff, which depended on having a really good rotation. And that went away. And so he wasn't able, like, say, a Max, to start doing that with a curve and get the car in a better rotation point for the exit. He just couldn't do it. He's still relying on the same rotation point that he felt was the one he always wanted. So that went away, and he never really adapted to that, in my opinion. Now, you're asking why he was always quite good in the wet. He was quite good in the wet for the reasons I've just said. Great sensitive car control, very good throttle application, which is a very different thing to what I was just talking about, which is breaking down to a point where you want the car to rotate and have immediate grip. He didn't have grip in 14. He probably still had very, very good throttle control and throttle application, but he didn't actually have the grip level that allowed him to get the power on when he wanted to. But in terms of the wet, when it was wet, of course, a lot of that went away, and it was all about just sensitivity, steering inputs, braking inputs, and outputs, and throttle application, all of which he does really well. It's just that in the dry, he was absolutely focused throughout his career, right to the end, on that style of driving that I just described, as was Jean Alesi. Jean, I say not quite to the degree of Jean. I've never seen a driver like more than Jean Alesi turn in so early into a corner. It was unbelievable. You thought half the time it was the last corner, you think he was just pulling into the pit lane. I mean, it was just crazy. But he, worked. When he had grip, he was really, really quick. But Vettel wasn't to that extent. But he had all the other stuff you need to be really good. And in terms of why he was good in the wet, I'll always remember watching with my buddy Matthew Marsh. We were watching on the outside of Degner at Suzuka when Vettel was, prior to even having driven a Grand Prix, he was doing Fridays for BMW. And we watched him come into Degner 1 with understeer, and he kind of lived with it, and the back end started to go, and there was just like boom like that. There was a flick control of the oversteer. It was flick oversteer basically, and he was just extraordinary. Amazing balance and car control with not a lot of grip on the outside of the circuit there. Fabulous to watch. So that's why Sebastian Vettel is good in the wet. And I think, I use the word flair, I think he always had very good feel for where the grip was in the wet. And he, you know, driving around the outside where the grip was necessarily, on some corners, he was always on top of that too. So there you go. Sash Sherman, Peter, Vettel went away from an Adrian Newey team to Ferrari. Makes me think that he must have been crazy to have done that. Alonso would never go from Aston Martin to Ferrari now if the offer was given. Yeah, slightly different circumstances, but yeah, I think Adrian, he just got into that sort of Fernando Alonso, Nelson Piquet mode of this teammate's doing something. The team must be favouring the teammate for him to be as quick as he is. I've got to get out of here. And I think, you know, that's what was going on with Sebastian Vettel. All of a sudden, I don't think he thought Red Bull were favouring Daniel Ricciardo, but he definitely thought there's something weird here that I'm not getting, or it's not the same. I don't understand it. Ferrari have just made me a huge offer. I've got 4 world championships. I'm only going to be racing for a limited amount of time. I might as well take advantage of all the money and the glory that comes of being at Ferrari. And of course, being a 4 times world champion, I'll win more world championships at Ferrari, as Michael did. I think that's what he thought. Because what he didn't think was, Ricciardo's actually beating me fairly consistently in qualifying because he's doing something differently with the back end of the car. What is he doing? I need to improve in that area. He didn't think that way because he's a 4 times world champion. And so when he got to Ferrari, and guess what? They didn't have a great back end either. I mean, he did very well with the car, but they didn't have a great back end either. And, you know, it was kind of just like, he was a very, very good racing driver, but he wasn't Sebastian Vettel dominating, if you see what I mean. Yeah, the parallel's a bit different, isn't it? Because Alonso, I mean, what you're saying, he would never leave, he shouldn't have left an Adrian Newey team. I think you're right. Just like Daniel Ricciardo should never have left. You know, you work very hard all your racing life to get into a team like Red Bull when Adrian Newey was there, and you walk away from it, as Vettel and Daniel did. I mean, that's crazy. And just shows how things change when you become famous and money becomes part of the game. And then Alonso, well, yeah, I mean, Alonso was hoping to get a Red Bull drive when he walked away from Ferrari and didn't. So you could argue in reverse, he should never have left Ferrari. He should have done a better job at Ferrari of making everybody love him and being the driver that they always wanted to have. Instead of which, by halfway through the year, Felipe Massa was, you know, saying, this is impossible. I can't drive in this team with Fernando alongside me. And a lot of people, of course, at Ferrari love Felipe Massa and listen to what he said. So that went, you know, quite a long way towards what happened there. But if Fernando had stayed at Ferrari, I think it would have been a different story for sure. Now, and there's no way anyone would leave Aston Martin if you're in there, because you've got Adrian Newey there, of course. Sarosh continuing, he's got a whole lot of questions from Sarosh. What kind of adjustments did the short corner drivers like Mansell and Prost have to do for adjusting to the active ride system of the Williams? None at all. They just, I mean, Nigel has so much feel for the car that he quite quickly, within a couple of laps, knows, like all the great drivers, nothing unusual here amongst the great drivers, knows exactly how that car needs to be driven and just drives it there. And, you know, if he has to get over a threshold of entry speed that's beyond anything he's ever experienced in his life, he'll just do it. And he'll feel innately that that is where it needs to be. Prost, I think, when he was driving an active car for the first time really, which was 93, I think it was a bit of a shock for him, and he'd had so much road dust by then that it was more difficult for him to adapt. But he did adapt very well. I'm not sure he was far short of the limit of the car. It's just that he wasn't able to manipulate the car and do as much with it as perhaps the Williams team thought he would. But he still won the championship. And it didn't, like Nigel, it didn't take that much adaptation, because ultimately a racing car is about grip and balance. That's what it is. That's what the drivers are feeling, regardless of whether they're doing, you know, a lap time that's within a second of the pole or a lap time that's within a tenth of the pole. It's all about grip and balance, and speed to some extent is irrelevant. And so you drive according to the grip and balance of the car. That's why you see guys from Formula 3 going into Formula 2 and going pretty well straight off, and guys from Formula 2 going into Formula 1 and going pretty well straight off, because within a few laps, if they're good drivers, very good drivers, everything is relevant. and is relative, sorry. And so you know, the speed is greater on acceleration, but the braking is greater, and you're looking at the point where you know the car is going to start moving, and you start adapting to that and feeling how you're going to drive it. So it's all about relative speed. As I said yesterday, just on that point, you know, go and look at Rust Bucket Motorsport, because here's a guy driving a VW Passat or whatever through the forests on the gravel, and it's as spectacular and as dramatic as it is watching Walter Roll go up Pikes Peak in a Quattro. You know, it's just the same thing. Of course he's going much slower, and of course he's on terrible tires and this and that, but what he's actually doing with the car, you actually don't need any more than that. It's unbelievable, his car control. Rust Bucket Motorsport. Sarosh, final point. Peter, for the next race, let's hope that Leclerc continues to drive without emotion and just knowing that he has a God-given talent, and he can naturally compensate with any issues and not overthink. Yeah, I think he will. I mean, some of the Leclerc brainstorms have not been, I mean, we've heard him on the radio having brainstorms, but they haven't necessarily resulted in any sort of incident. When he has incidents, it's sort of when things are going reasonably well, and he's either out on a Friday and he's doing a run and all of a sudden he's in the barrier, or, you know, he's leading the race as in the French Grand Prix a few years ago and he's off. You know, it's weird things. And I think now Ferrari are not on a roll, but I think the team around him is starting to really gel in terms of knowing what he wants, how he works, and getting the best from him. And I think he'll still be prone probably to the odd error, hopefully confined to Fridays, but might be Saturday mornings as well. But I it's not that usual for Charles to make massive mistakes in a race. He does, but not that often. And I think if he has a reasonable race car and good balance, he'll be fine. As I said, you know, the first question, how do you think Lewis will go? I think Lewis has got half a chance to be up there with Charles this weekend. And it would be interesting to see. Put it this way, if he's not up there with Charles this weekend, as I think I've said this before in another live stream, I think we have to start to really worry about how Lewis is ever going to go in a Ferrari, because Hungary, Ferrari, you know, it's all front end, it's all Lewis type corners. It should be a good track for him. As good as the Ferrari will let it be. In other words, he should be right up there with Charles. Daniel, hi Peter, thoughts on artificial rain to make racing more exciting? Well, yeah, I mean, Bernie was always one for throwing water down for a couple of laps at an unexpected point, just to suddenly catch everybody out. You know, the problem is, I mean, artificial rain over a full Grand Prix distance would be impossible, I guess, wouldn't it? I think the most they can do, this cloud seeding thing, is, you know, literally an hour, less than that. I think it's just like, you know, a 10-minute rainfall, isn't it? I don't think it's a real thing in terms of a long period of time. So it wouldn't happen. I mean, you could make a wet track, I suppose, if they went down my route of building classic circuits in the middle of the Sahara Desert or the Nevada deserts, with lots of funding from the local community. They build a Nürburgring, a Brands Hatch, a Spa, an old Spa, a Sepang, whatever you want to have. All these great circuits. I suppose you could throw in, oh yeah, let's make sure that we can make the track wet for 5 laps as well. Some sort of irrigation under track system. Be quite cool, wouldn't it? And everybody has to drive around on slicks in the wet. I'd love to see that, but yeah, won't happen, will it? They're not even thinking of building these circuits, let alone making the track wet. Of course, the other point, of course, is that the reason we have, I mean, for those, it's an obvious point, but the reason we have tread on tyres, any tyre, is to cope with the rain. And if we knew in this world, we might end up there, who knows, that we were never going to have any rain, there's no reason why everybody couldn't drive around on slicks on the road. So in Formula One, we have slicks, and the basic thing is, well, if it's wet, we'll go to groove tyres. And the interesting thing is that when Max Mosley came in as president and said, I want to go to treaded tyres, he didn't say, because I want them to race in the wet and the dry on the same tyres. He said, oh, it's because it'll make them look more like road cars. And so there's never ever been any talk, really, since, I would guess, 1969, 70, when slicks came in, of having Formula One race on a tyre that can do the wet and the dry. I think it'd be quite a good thing personally, and I'm not sure how Pirelli would approach that, but I suppose on the basis that they don't like building tyres that do a full Grand Prix distance, and everybody loves pit stops, they're not going to like a tyre that's capable of doing a full Grand Prix distance in the wet and the dry, are they? So yeah, anyway, I do love wet races, and I do love watching drivers in the wet, and we don't get to see much of it these days for the reasons we've gone through a lot now since Spa, and it's kind of a shame. Saros back again. Hi Peter, maybe I'm mistaken. Go-karts aren't necessarily the best way to see if a driver can be good in Formula One, since it's quite darty and you can't manipulate the car. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Well, that's right. It is right. And it is darty. But there is still weight transfer, which is what driving a car well is all about. And it's a question of adaptation, and then of course it's a question of many other factors as well: money, the mentality of the young person who's driving. Go-karts are a great way of generating the feel for trackcraft and understanding the ins and outs of motorsport. And there are plenty of them, believe me, at a young age. There's nothing wrong with karting; it's a brilliant thing. But in terms of identifying the next Max Verstappen, you've got to be a bit careful, because as good as Max is in karts and was in karts, it was how good he then became when he had more manipulative tools with which to play. That's when he started to go into his next, category of greatness. There aren't that many tools in a kart. It's steering and it's flicking and it's how you brake. But in a proper car, there's always how you come out of the brakes, there's the throttle application, there's the initial steering input, there's a lot of other things that come into play. And that's a different thing. And very few of those can be simulated either. That's all about just getting into a racing car and feeling it. So you do get quite a lot of young guys who are quick in karts and don't necessarily have that same edge when they go into racing cars. Depends on the money, depends on the backing, depends on the amount of testing of the team. Obviously, there are all those factors as well. Equally, if you are the next Max Verstappen, for sure you're going to be in quick in karts. That's a given. So yeah, it's an interesting point. M.A. Khan, I've been watching races of Nigel Mansell and Michael Schumacher. Were they the last pure short corner drivers? Lewis is more hybrid. Would you put Max Charles as a hybrid or pure short corner? Oh no, I'd say Max Charles pure short corner, definitely. Definitely up there with Michael and Nigel in that sense. Carlos Reutemann as well. Very, very good short corner drivers. It's interesting you use the word hybrid with Lewis. I think that's probably quite accurate. As we've said many times, I think he is naturally a short corner driver. I don't think he thinks about it very much, and I don't think he would describe it that way if you were to talk to him. But I think he's got this natural feel of wanting to get into the corner quite early and get the car nice and stable for a rotation. And that stability, that management of the stability is what Lewis is all about. And that was all that meant nothing when he was driving the 2022 Merc. And he's since then become a lot more conventional. Although, as I say, keep saying, at Ferrari, for me in Silverstone, it's starting to come back a little bit again. Kind of depends how much stability he's got. And let's hope that the Ferrari has got more stability now. So, plenty of others too. I mean, Stirling Moss was for sure a short corner driver. And let's think of some others. Well, Alan Prost too. Definitely. So, Sheriff of Saint-Devote, we need better Formula One media. All of them were calling Isaac Hadjar the weakest rookie before the season started. Were they? Interesting. Yeah, well, I remember a certain TV commentator saying that McLaren would be making a mistake if they ran Lewis Hamilton in 2008. They should be running Gary Paffett. So, there's a lot of differences of opinion out there. 2007, when he was coming into Formula One. Towards the end of 2006, there was a lot of talk about Gary Paffett should be the right guy for McLaren and not Lewis. Nobody's perfect, and we all have our ideas about drivers. Indeed, Frank Williams thought, he was even prepared to sell part of the team. But the one thing he would never, ever, ever do is relinquish the choice of the drivers. To him, that was the absolute greatest thing that a team principal can have. And I mentioned yesterday we're talking about Cadillac and the drivers. They're going to, if it's going to be sort of Bottas, Perez, yawn. And I mentioned, why don't they put at least one young American in one car, have Xavier Bottas in the other car, and go that way. At least do something a little bit, different, and obviously try to capture the American energy by having a young American. And Kyle Kirkwood, to me, is a good example of a guy that deserves the opportunity. He definitely would do well. The problem is, of course, he's doing very well in IndyCar at the moment. And how do you then jump from IndyCar to Formula One? Well, you give him the opportunity in his own mind to adjust, and you give him lots of sim sessions, and you get him ready, and you give him some testing between his IndyCar races. I'm sure he'd be up for it. There are plenty of others. I mean, Colton Hurd is another. And people say, oh, well, he's not going as well as he used to. But give confidence to these people and let them take their own path. It's no surprise Colton Hurd, to me, has gone slightly off the boil, because it was on the verge of something really big happening for him, and then it was all stopped, and then nothing happened. It would have a bit of an effect on you, probably. So there are good young Americans out there. They're not the only two, for sure. And we're going to. I hope we're going to see some in that car, or the Haas car, for that matter. Sheriff of Sandoval again. You look healthy, Mr. Windsor. Thank you very much. Yeah, try to be. Take care. We're going to see you in a Grand Prix this year. Singapore. Yeah, maybe Singapore. Maybe one of the ending races as well. Still looking at the calendar. Quite a lot going on with other projects. That's the thing. But nonetheless, be quite good to be out there. Al, hi Peter. From everything you've heard about RB, Red Bull powertrain Ford, do you think they'll be competitive next year, enough for Max to fight for the championship? It's very difficult for any of us to say, even Max Verstappen, because we don't know what the others are doing, really, powertrain-wise. 50% electrification is a huge change, and there are many other changes as well. On the basis that Red Bull powertrain have had a very good run now with Honda, and there's quite a good infrastructure there, even if obviously Honda personnel side of it have left. I think Red Bull powertrain has got a very good guy running, Phil Prue, who is a racer. I've known Phil for a long time. He was a very good race engineer, and he's developed more and more to Mercedes and now Red Bull. And I think he'll be on top of what's going on there, as well as anybody out there. You got to say that Honda with Aston Martin under Andy Cowell are going to be pretty impressive, I would imagine. I mean, all the ingredients are there. Adrian knows all the Honda people. Andy Cowell's the mastermind of all the great days at Mercedes powertrains, and they're all together there at Aston Martin. But I think, you could say the Red Bull Ford powertrain, a little bit of a underdog, not many people talking about it, a lot of people saying, oh, maybe it won't be very good, but I think it'll be quite a compact small unit of people doing a very, very good job. I'll be surprised if they don't, let's put it that way. Sheriff of Sandoval, the last great wet race at Spa was the 2010 Belgian Grand Prix, a true masterclass by Sir Lewis Hamilton. Yeah, well, there's another great wet race for you. Yeah, I mean, they keep coming out now, don't they? We keep remembering all these. It's difficult to remember all of those races, but definitely, yeah, that was superb. And it was a reminder of how much everybody loves wet races. Look how much we're talking about it. And yet, what do they give us in Belgium? a dry Belgian Grand Prix. David Hughes. Hi, Peter. A very civilized time here in Eastern Oz. And by the way, Wollongabba is an inner suburb of Brisbane. Oh, well, great. Good to hear. Thank you very much. And I'm glad it's a civilized time where you're out there maybe having a beer on the veranda or something like that. And the magpies aren't causing too much trouble. Magpies in Australia are always the bane of our lives, weren't they? You'd wear sort of an anti-magpie hat on your head when you go running or cycling. But no, I really, what you've just described, just with a few words there, David, makes me, yearn a little bit for those evenings in Australia. Lovely. Al, have you seen the new interview Max did with Ford? I think you'll enjoy it. You get to see what goes on inside his head as he's approaching a corner and driving a new car. No, I haven't seen that. I'll look out for that. Thank you very much. Yeah, here's the news. Sujith, Freddie Vasseur confirmed with a long-term deal to continue with Ferrari. That was just announced before we went on air today. Are we allowed to say on air? Do we go on air? Or do we? I don't know, we're streaming, that's right. Yeah, I mean, as I said, when people were asking about Freddie and potentially Christian Horner going in there, we had a long chat to Cameron about that. That was sort of what the community were thinking, were mooting. I said, I can't imagine why they'd want to get rid of Fred, because the damage is done now. He didn't get Adrian, and he got rid of Carlos Sainz. I mean, whether or not he was told to or whether or not it was his decision, let's not go down that path. But he did, and he's the team principal. And it is what it is. And anybody who now comes in isn't going to be able to change that. They're not going to be able to come in with Adrian Newey. They're not going to be able to come in with a new top designer pack. They're just going to continue to basically run what is there and run it in their own little stylistic way. So they might as well just keep Fred and keep doing what he's doing. And that's what they're doing. And so in that sense, it's a logical decision. In another sense, it was completely illogical in my mind to make the priority signing Lewis rather than signing Adrian Newey. And to me, that's what, Fred's job above all, if Adrian Newey is available, like that of all other team principals, including Toto Wolff, is to get Adrian. The only one to whom that didn't apply really was Zach Brown. And that's because Zach had already hired a lot of good people that did work for Adrian and were doing a very good job at McLaren, so why change anything? Sujith, if he hadn't lost Bianchi, we would right now have a Bianchi and Leclerc lineup in Ferrari. Could you imagine that? I think Sainz was a Bonotto hire, which irked the higher-ups at Ferrari. Yeah, well, I take your word for that, Sujith. I don't know that for sure. I don't think you do that Jules would have got that drive. I mean, it'd be nice to think that he would have, but we don't know for sure, do we? Yeah, very sad, and it's easy. It's easy in racing, I guess, just to move on. We have to, and we think of Hubert and Spa, and we think of Bianchi, and De Villota. Maria De Villota. She was a good girl. Her dad was a good guy, and they all had these terrible accidents, and yeah, great shame. Gandalf the Fool. Hi Peter, would you say the essence of short corner is to minimize the downside of rotation? Does short corner necessarily result in a shorter arc through the corner? Thanks. Really getting down to it now. Well, I would say that if you don't have a feel for the right moment to minimize the downside of rotation, then you'll never be a short corner driver. It's not so much, it is a lot to do with the manipulation of that, but it's also to do with knowing the right moment for it. And that changes every corner, every lap, as I've said before. And that is an innate God-given talent of knowing that if I do this, I can gain this entry speed here. I know I can manipulate the car through the understeer there, and that is the point at which I'm just going to have to do that really boring thing and rotate the car. And I know exactly how much steering input I'm going to give it. It's almost that thought process, and that glibly passes over the unbelievably difficult thing of getting to the rotation point when you are braking with cornering load on the car and keeping things as stable as you can possibly keep them within the realms of all the dynamic weight shifting of the car by manipulating the throttle against the brakes, against the steering. Tiny, tiny adjustments, some of which are not even readable on telemetry. And that is what Max and Charles do really, really well. And it's all you see is the car just going in like that and then coming out of the corner looking pretty neat. And the average casual TV commentator will say, oh, look how smooth he is on the steering or something like that, which kind of belies everything that's just happened. And it is that knowing that moment. There's nothing regimented about being a great short corner driver like Max Verstappen. It's never, this is the braking point, this is the turn-in point, this is the rotation point, this is the power application point. It's none of that. everything is innate feel based on the reality of the car being different from one corner to another. Tire temperatures are different. The way you apply the brake pedal initially is always different. It's never exactly the same. It's never exactly the same. Same with initial steering input. It's never exactly the same. That's why warning the car, as Rob Wilson always says, warning the car with the tiniest of movement is so critical. It just settles everything in the car before you then give it the substance of what you want to do with your hands or your feet. And that's God-given, definitely, because you can't look at traces. And that's why a Sergio Perez or a Yuki Tsunoda or a Liam Lawson trying to work out why they're slower than Max, looking at Max's telemetry, they'll never get an answer from that. The best they can do is not even follow him. The best they can do is actually go out on the track and watch him and listen to his power. That's about the only thing you can do. And they never do that. Drivers just don't do that because they're too busy. Job list, gym, physio, debrief, sponsorship commitment, security guards, Netflix. They never actually do what they need to do, which is actually watch and see how he does it, which is extraordinary, isn't it? But it's, in my experience, that's true. It was true 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and it's true now. Well, it's not true. I mean, as I say, Carlos Reutemann used to send me out anyway to watch Alan Jones and other drivers that Emerson in the early days and other drivers to see what they were doing. And he always learnt from that. Oh, really? Okay, I try this tomorrow. And he was always thinking, but I don't imagine too many today are doing that. I don't even see F2 and F3 drivers out there watching. They're all in their paddock. I mean, Hungary's one place where they come through that left-hander behind the pits, and the F2 and F3 paddock is down there, or used to be anyway. And you could stand at the fence there and watch. And I used to do that because it's not a bad place to be. But you'd be shocked at how few F2 and F3 drivers are there watching. I don't know what they are doing. What they're not doing is driving because it's Formula One cars on the circuit. So they don't actually watch. So in the second part of your question, does a shorter corner necessarily result in a shorter arc through the corner? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you had one of those things that paint the white lines on the road, in the middle of the road, and the white paint comes out, and you put one of those, but you just made it a constant trace as distinct from blocks of white, and you did a lap with Carlos Sainz, and then you did a lap with Charles Leclerc in Ferraris, leaving this white trace, and then you measured those two white traces. For sure, Charles Leclerc's would be shorter. Absolutely for sure. Because Carlos has got a longer corner going on. He's going in deeper. He's got a conventional geometric curve into the geometric apex, and then he's got the geometric curve coming out, whereas Charles is basically shortening everything. So yeah, absolutely shorter. That's why it's a shorter corner. I mean, it's a short corner because you're making the corner shorter. The straights are longer going in and coming out as a result. But it's not just a question of geometry, as I keep saying. It's a question of incredible sensitivity and subtleness and suppleness as well. And that's a God-given thing. And it wasn't necessarily something you would have seen Max doing when he was karting. A little bit, but not a lot, because he didn't have enough tools with which to play to do what he wanted with the dynamic weights. And bear in mind, I keep talking about dynamic weight. Think about what a dynamic weight is. And I brought this analogy in before, which is the pool table, the billiard board table with all the balls in the middle, and you've got 4 people on each corner, and you're constantly manipulating the table to try to make sure none of the balls touch the edge. That's kind of what it's like. There's so many different dynamic weights in so many different directions going on when you're going into a corner, and to manage those through through something as basic as an accelerator, a brake, and a steering wheel. They are basic in that sense, but to do that is incredible. And yeah, there'll be the odd thing. I mean, it was interesting in the race, wasn't it, when they told Max, what was it? If he wanted, go to torque 8 if he wanted more. I think it was more traction out of turn 9, I think it was. And he obviously did. And, that's okay. There's a small thing there, which he knows that with that extra torque on the back, he's able to do it with the fuel and the battery, whatever. He can use that extra torque. And the minute he knew he had that, for sure, it wouldn't have just been, I can get on the power earlier. It would have been, okay, now I can maybe rotate the car, slightly less steering input because I can use the throttle a fraction more to get the car straighter, and I can save the front tires a bit and do it that way. That's what it would have been. He would have been balancing the advantage of torque 8 against something else that was a bit of a shortcoming in the corner. It wouldn't necessarily have just been more torque through the engine. And that's that's the beauty of Max. And I think maybe from halfway down the grid to the bottom, maybe it's a little bit more basic. Torque 8, yeah, more power, more grip, or whatever. But that's not how a great driver uses a small advantage like that, or roll stiffness change, or a brake bias change, for example. It wouldn't necessarily just be in when he's hitting the brakes. It would be the way he's using the brakes as he's coming out of them as well. Coming out of the brakes is just as important as how you go into the brakes, how you come out of the pedal, the rate at which you come out of the pedal, particularly going into a corner, obviously with load on the car, because it affects obviously what the front of the car's doing. So great question. Thank you very much. CACMaster69. Hi, Peter. Do you think anyone else could have done better than Alonso in 06 or 14? No, I don't. I think he is, a great racing driver. As I said before, to me, he's not like Max because he likes to just feel the back end as he's going into a corner. He does, he loves to do that with the steering and just get on top of the car. But from that point onwards, his footwork and his handwork is sublime. And the car, Fernando car, always looks as if it's settled on the road and looks nice and square. And when you watch Fernando, you think, yeah, Formula One. Whereas when you watched a Gilles Villeneuve or a Ronnie Peterson and they were doing that, you also thought, yeah, Formula One. But it's two slightly different experiences and emotions. And to some extent, the Fernando thing looks so packaged and neat. It's like whereas Ronnie Peterson or Gilles is the football match on the Sunday afternoon, Fernando is Monday morning in the hotel lobby. Everything's fresh and clean, and the bags are really nice, and the car's outside waiting, and he just has to walk out the lot. Everything's perfect, That's how Fernando looks to me on a racetrack. And he has that jink. And yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any race car that Fernando hasn't driven beautifully all the time. He's that good. Politically, very difficult guy. You got to know Fernando, and he's very well set up. I mean, he's close, tight with Flavio Briatore, and he's doing well. He's doing well in the way he's worked at Aston Martin and got on the right side of the Strolls, and obviously he and Adrian get on very well with one another. So that's a huge, huge advantage for Fernando. And if he can pull that off, if he can keep that drive for 26, then that kind of makes up for all the, you could say, political mistakes he's made until now. The way he left Ferrari, the way he left McLaren, where had he handled it differently, he probably would have won more world championships. But if he can pull off driving an Adrian Newey Aston Martin next year, then that makes up for all those deficiencies, and he could well win the championship, as I say. Ty Condero. Hi, Peter. Do you think that Oscar Piestra is actually making progress on tyre management, or is the McLaren too gentle to develop that skill? No, the McLaren's not too gentle to develop that skill. Speak to Lando about that, because he keeps like to tell people how difficult the car is to drive sometimes, not always, but sometimes. Is Oscar making progress on time management? Yeah, for sure. I mean, regardless of whether you are a Carlos Sainz-y, Liam Lawson, wide entry oversteery driver, leaving with very little margin of operation. You can throw Oliver Behrman in there, although I put him quite near George Russell. Even if you're driving like that, race on race on race, your experience and your knowledge of how to drive with graining and with a tyre that's starting to fall off the cliff on the front or the left rear, wherever, your ability to manage that grows. It's a natural thing. It's just a logical, organic thing. If Oscar's still, in my opinion, which is why I wouldn't put him up there with Max in terms of pace or race pace or single lap pace, but he's got all this great talent, and which he's using beautifully against Lando. But to get to the next level, the Max Verstappen level, and actually if say he was in a Red Bull to beat Max Verstappen, he would need to develop his whole short corner repertoire, which he was and has shown he's capable of doing. And I think he's kind of eschewed that for this period of his career where he's just got his feet under the table at McLaren, and now he's doing really well. If it ain't broke, don't touch it, and just continue doing what he's doing. But I think if he can win a championship, I think then the next step for Oscar is to really start thinking about how Max does drive and start to get into the corners earlier and make the whole lap shorter. And if he does that, there's no reason why he wouldn't be right up there with Max and Charles. You can learn that if you've got that sort of ability. And I said it was God-given. I think he's got that God-given talent. I just don't think he's released that. And he's keeping it under control at the moment just to try and win this championship. And so I think if he does that, then his time management, of course, then will go up, because one of the other benefits of driving the way Max drives or Charles drives is that you give yourself a much bigger operational zone in which to be able to balance a car that's got graining, or the front end is going away, or it's got understeer or oversteer. You've got many more things you can do within that entry period before the rotation, as distinct from a Carlos or a Liam who's committing to the power on at this moment because that's the latest they can break, and they've got to get the power on as soon as possible. Oh, the front end's gone. What are they going to do at that point? Or the back end, they're just going to live with it and live with their car control. And it makes the whole thing really slow and destroys the tires, of course. But whereas if you're going into a corner early, it's not because you've got more room, it's just because you've got the car settled and you're creating this platform. You can react to the crosswind or the graining that's worse than you thought. Gives you more tools. And that's why the great drivers often are incredibly consistent over a race distance. Hi Peter, this is CNC Thematic. Hi Peter, I recently watched the 98 Argentine Grand Prix. I thought it was one of Michael Schumacher's best drives. You any memories of that race? Just like you really, I think it was a great drive. 98 was the first year of McLaren with Bridgestone, and that was a good car, and Michael all of a sudden had serious opposition, and I think it was a great win by Michael. I think that was the race, was it not, when Darren Heath put his camera inside the McLaren cockpit and saw the additional fiddle brake pedal? I think it was that race. I think it was Argentina. That was, that was a big thing, wasn't it? Because it ended up getting it banned. Thank you very much, Darren. Great photographer, of course, and we've had him on our channel before. I think it was Argentina. It might have been Brazil or something. Anyway, it was a good race, 98 Argentine Grand Prix. I think the other point is that Argentina is such a great track, great country for racing and Formula One with its history and its heritage, and how nice that whole Parque Almirante Brown Autodrome was, and all the different configurations of the circuit. And I love going through that Carlos Reutemann thing when he had in 1980 he did the British Grand Prix and the Côte d'Azur Rally in the same week or within 10 days, and he was saying at the moment in the rally car, because obviously he's incredibly new to it, he felt that he's having to leave margin. He said the only way I can compare it is I go through the long corner at the back of the Argentine circuit and lift my right foot, which is like anathema to Carlos. In fact, the opposite. I think it was in 81. I think it was 81. Williams discovered that Carlos actually bent the throttle pedal in the 07, and he'd been doing that through the Cordovon, which is that long right-hander, just absolutely flat with the G-force, and he actually bent the throttle pedal and they had to strengthen it up. Mega. Thank you for that. Very nice. Argentina 98. Yeah. Jez James, hi Peter. I've heard you mention a few times that if Formula One drivers are not brave, as it's just touch and feel, it could be there's an element of bravery in finding grip. Well, I don't think there is. I think it's just a question of feel. It's a question of feel through the arms, the elbows, the small of the back, the thighs, underneath your legs, everything. You're feeling that, and of course, there's a certain amount of self-confidence required to get in a racing car and go to full throttle and through the gears and be quick. You've got to have a feeling that I know how to do this and I can do it. Obviously, if you don't have that feeling and you get in the car and do it, that requires bravery. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about racing drivers who have that feel, then don't need to be brave to get to the point of knowing where the grip level is and how the balance of the car is. That's just a question of feel and judgment and manipulation of the steering, the throttle and the brakes. That's basically what I'm saying. Of course, if you wanted your grandmother to get in the car, she'd have to be very brave, most of the grannies, not all of them, but most of them, to get in the car. So that is a different thing. And to put it another way, if you, I don't know, what I'm trying to say is that if the driver had no clue about how quickly he was going, let's say it was a piece of road with absolutely nothing around it, it was just absolutely flat circuit with desert around it, it's a long right-hander, and it was iffy whether you could be flat in fifth gear through there or not. I don't think many drivers would need courage to feel that movement, would they? I don't think they do. And Sterling Moss is the guy that said that to me. He said, no, there's no element of bravery in driving a Grand Prix car. And then his follow-up was, and if there is, you shouldn't be driving a Grand Prix car, because it should all be about anticipation and feel. You should be knowing, as Carlos Reutemann said, you should be seeing the exit of the corner before you even turned in. That doesn't require bravery. That requires feel and sensitivity and the inner mind knowing exactly what you're going to be doing in the car. So I hope that kind of makes sense. I don't think drivers to my experience aren't that aware of speed. They're only aware of grip and balance and looking at the points they're looking at, and everything's kind of happening in slow motion. So it's not a question of, wow, we're going 330 kilometers an hour between the cement walls here and wherever it is, that ridiculous circuit, Saudi Arabia. Where it's just a question of, this is what the car will do. It's sitting flat on the road. It's got lots of downforce. Boom, boom, boom. That's what I'm doing going into the corner. That's how they think. May seem strange to all of us, I suppose, when we're on the motorway and we try to go quickly on the motorway. On a German Autobahn, at 200 kilometers an hour feels quite quick when you're passing cars going quite slowly in the middle in the slow lanes. But it's only a relative thing. So there you go. Jez James again. Senna going off racing line in the wet to take over lap 193 Donington. Yeah. Well, it's no different from Nigel Mansell doing the same thing in the Belgian Grand Prix to Senna and passing him, going around the outside of Blanchimont and then making sure you got the inside run into the hairpin. Going around the outside of Senna at Blanchimont, massively. But he didn't do that because he was brave. He did it because here's Etten said, oh, he's gone, he's backed off here, and I'm going to the right. Yeah, I've got the grip. Yeah, everything's fine. That's how Nigel would have thought. It wouldn't be, I don't care what happens to my car. I'm going to pass him on the outside regardless, even if I kill myself. It's not going to be that. That's bravery, but it's not that. When you're in the race car, it's just like, boom, oh no, I can do this. Go. It's all touch and feel. But yeah, Senna around the outside, Donington, 93, very good. Hello, Cackmaster 69. Hello, what is it about Alonso's driving style you like and dislike? As my favourite driver, what makes him so good? I kind of just gone through that, just to recap. I've never really got on top of that whole boom that he does going into most corners, virtually all of them. But everything else, I'm in awe of Fernando. And I think because of that, he's not always, I wouldn't classify him as a great short corner driver, because he's always just feeling the rear of the car. That's his thing. He likes to feel the rear, and that's how he gets his balance. It's like the difference between left-handed people, right-handed people, or colorblind people, or not colorblind. It's just a thing with Fernando that in order to get that incredible balance that he has with all four wheels on the road and how he does it so well, the way he generates that feeling is by, boom, just loading up the rear before he goes in. He likes to feel that rear. And that, to me, has always made him different from the great short corner drivers like Moss, Clark, obviously Mansell, Schumacher, Prost, and today Max, Charles, and to some extent Lewis. And there are others too. But that's why I never put Fernando in that category, because he's always been slightly, I just like to feel that rear. And I spoke to him about this when I did some laps with him once in a Renault Megane Turbo. And I said, you always do that, Fernando. And he said, oh, do I? I said, yeah. Every corner you tend to do that. And he said, yeah, maybe I don't. Yeah, and he was correct in not really caring about what I said, because why would he care? It's what he does, and it works for him. Who's Peter Windsor saying that he's slightly jinky and feeling the rear? Well, so what? I'm quick. I'm Fernando Alonso, which is exactly how he should think, of course. Chris, hi Peter, with the outstanding Formula 1 knowledge, you should start an F1 team. I'm sure it'll be a massive success. Well, thank you very much. I've tried 3 times to do a Formula 1 team, failed dismally on every occasion. 1 was Brabham, 2 was Ikazawa, and 3 was USF1. All different reasons. Brabham because the guy that I had a contract with to do the team and was putting up quite a lot of the money suddenly decided to sell everything to a guy who then got subsequently arrested by the Swiss Banking Commission for $100 million embezzlement. So that ended up in court, as you can imagine. Secondly, Ikazawa, which I think would have been very good. Tetsuya Ikazawa, very good Japanese driver, won a lot of F3 and did well in F2 races in his time and had done well in Japanese racing. Felt it was the right time to do a Japanese branded Formula 1 team based in the UK, car design in the UK. Everything was great until the Japanese stock market collapsed halfway through the project, and there's nothing we could do. And as I see, it hasn't really recovered, has it? And then thirdly, USF1, great idea, do the car in America, keep the costs down, take advantage of all that great American technology, operate the car from Europe. And from going to the point where we were going to enter the championship, do some testing, and then join the back of the grid and do it in a logical way, we were suddenly given 9 months to build a factory, build the car, crash test the car, race the car in 9 months. It was never going to happen. So all different things. They're all in a nutshell explanations. Obviously, there are a lot more nuances to all of those. But thank you for saying that. I've always loved it. And I've been very lucky twice in my career. Once at Williams to run the race and test team, which was great, and we, won the world championship. And also at Ferrari, where I worked running the operation once John Barnard had left and taken all the staff with him to Benetton, and had to put together a completely new staff there in Ferrari's operation in the UK, where they built the Formula 1 cars and designed them. And we did a pretty good job with that. We got the people very quickly, we got the cars out on time, and the cars were much better than they had been in '89. And actually, as we know, they won quite a lot of Grand Prix. So I was very lucky to do that, and the team of people I put together there, I'll always remember them. And as same with my Williams guys, I think it's 54 people I was working for. I'd like to think I was working for them, actually. Yeah, that's the right way to phrase it, isn't it? It was just a great team. Cacmaster 69. Hi Peter, who do you think was the better driver in 1990, Senna or Prost? Wow. I don't think either of them changed that much. Obviously, there were major differences now in terms of the team and their relationship with one another. Suzuka, please advise. I don't know. I think they were what they were they not? Senna was quicker over the lap, and he was the ultimate perfectionist, pushed everything to the limit as much as he possibly could, Honda particularly, and later on, whatever engine company he was going to be with, Ford or whatever. And I think he was just an absolute driver, whereas Prost always focused on winning, and that was the goal, and he would compromise other things in order to get to that point, in terms of not necessarily going for the pole or being super quick on heavy fuel early in a race. I think Prost became a little bit confused politically later in his career, and he saw the way, I think he probably saw the way Ayrton had operated at McLaren, and he tried to operate that way at Ferrari. I think there's no doubt in my mind Nigel was a quicker driver at Ferrari in 1990 than Alain Prost. And although Prost was very good at bringing the car home and all the rest of it, but at that point at Ferrari, Prost was already saying to himself, if Nigel's going well, it's got to be because he's got an ex-Williams engineer there, Enrique Scalabroni, and I've got to get my guy over from McLaren, Steve Nichols, in order to balance things out, which of course messed the whole team up, and everything became a mess after that, as indeed it was in 91. And so that was the sort of beginning of Alain Prost's not really being the same driver, in my opinion. He was a bit more political, and it was all a bit scatty as a result. And so I think, probably Ayrton would be the answer to that question, I would say. Eventually got there. Let's not forget Nigel's pass of Berger in Mexico in 1990. Not bad. So this is a super chat from M.A. Khan saying, Peter, Isaac's performance is proof we should ignore the mainstream media and listen to PW. Also, any thoughts on the great Kimi? I feel for him. He's getting a lot of criticism after all the hype. Thank you, M.A. Khan. To me, Isaac was always going into the corners a little bit earlier, and I did say that in Formula 2. He looked very good, I thought. And I don't know why people don't see that, really, but it was pretty clear. Just the same way Frederick Vesti, to me, is a very, very good racing driver, because he's a short corner driver, has been from ever since I saw him in Formula 3. As for Kimi, I think he's got that touch, that short corner touch, which we see quite a lot on slow corners. And I did say around Monaco time that I was kind of a bit concerned about how he would go when the circuits got to be faster and we got to some proper medium speed and high speed corners. And I think that's kind of being borne out, because he's kind of doing what George Russell is doing, trying to do what George is doing, looking at his telemetry, and it's catching him out. And he's not doing it the way Kimi should be doing it, evolving as the soft, nice touch driver that he is. And I suspect that's because of the whole telemetry Mercedes operational system of, well, this is what George is doing, instead of just letting him find his own way there. And I think that's what's going on. And I think there's a lot of hype, as you say, and because of the hype, he's not developing as much on fast corners as he would if he was just doing it in a logical way, with completely blanking off everything that's going on around him. And added to that, as I say, is the complication of all the telemetry he's being told to look at and all the simulations he's having to do, none of which will be helpful, in my opinion. It's all going to be about feel for him. He'll be fine around Hungary, I suspect. I can't imagine where he won't be super quick in Hungary. That kink, turn 4, I imagine it's going to be flat, or very near flat, won't be a player. That right-hander down the back onto the long back straight, he'll be pretty good there. It's not that quick, and so therefore I think he'll be right there in Hungary. He'll be right there in Zandvoort. Monza, he might struggle at the Lesmos, and well, we know he struggled at the Parabolica. I don't think the Parabolica will probably be all right this time, but I think the Lesmos, Scari chicane, he might have a bit of an issue. Singapore, he'll be all right. Where are we going to then? America maybe. Oh no, Baku? I don't know, I've lost track what circuits we're going to. Anyway, I think he'll be all right for the next few circuits, Kimi. That's basically what I'm saying there. Suja says, Matthew Marsh, I remember from his Formula 1 analysis in the broadcast here in India. He was racing the Porsche Carrera Cup, I think. Are we talking about the same guy? We are indeed. He won the Porsche Asia Super Cup. Very, very impressive win by Matthew Marsh. He'd love to know that we are talking about him right now. I'm sure he would. He's a great guy, Matthew, and he lives now in Singapore, and he does a lot of behind-the-scenes great work with some of the Formula 1 teams, generating new sponsors for them and finding very good sponsorship alliances. So he's a top man, good guy, and a very good friend, has been a friend of mine for many, many years. We did several Macau Grand Prix together, by which I mean we put sponsorship packages together for worthy teams. In other words, Alan Docking or Bertram Schaefer, really good guys, and always had a laugh there. Had many, many funny moments with Matt in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and in Macau. Very good driver too. He had a Lotus 7 in London when I had a Lotus 7, so they were both green and yellow. We both pretended we were Patrick McGowan in The Prisoner. Excellent. Diego Marina. Thank you, Diego. Go, Peter. Loving this live stream. Triple header. Thank you very much. That's Diego in Madrid, who's constantly updating us on the progress of the Mad Ring. What a name. And of course, now all the anti-noise, anti-whatever people are starting to get involved, that they can see it's a reality. And so we'll watch this space with interest, I guess. But it looks like with all the earthworks that are going on, that circuit is still there. It's interesting how it's worked out, isn't it? You know, that's the Carlos Sainz circuit, and Barcelona's the Fernando Alonso circuit. Is there going to be room for the two of them at the end of all this? Who knows? Canel Rao says, "Hi Peter, greetings from NZ. When you say drivers are loading up the left rear, what are you looking out for? And how is the driver managing the loads on tyres during the race?" Well, it's not only the left rear, it's whatever rear it is, whatever the next corner is. So it's a left-hander, it's going to be the right rear. So Fernando's always just slightly looking at Liam Lawson, good example, your fellow Kiwi, he's a driver. You can tell, looking at the way he drives on track from all the camera angles, you can tell that when he goes into a corner, he's already in his mind, he knows what sort of corner he wants. He's just going to try and go in quite wide, get on the power as soon as possible. If necessary, apply a little bit of correction just to get the car straight and balanced, still on power, and then he's going to be powering it all the way through out of the corner. And you can see that, the way he does it. You can just tell the steering as he goes in. You can almost tell by the helmet angle that he's just waiting to load up the right rear. That's what he's feeling. Whereas with Max, with the helmet angle, almost, you can tell that he's only thinking about the loaded front, not the rear. Same with Fernando. You can always tell he's doing that when he's going for the rear. I don't know. I seem to be able to tell that. And maybe people say, well, what the hell would you know? But all I can do is describe what I feel when I'm watching it. And to me, that's what Liam does. And he's very wide corners, very long corners, but great car control. Don't take it away from him. And the first time I actually saw Liam Lawson as somebody very special actually was in Hungary in Formula 3 in a semi-wet session, and the way his car control was as he was just touching the curbs and as he was just using a little bit of is going a little bit too wide on occasion. The back end would do that, and he was just lovely in his car control. Doesn't mean to say he's ever going to be a great short corner driver and beat a guy like Isaac Hadjar, but it does mean that he's got great car control, and he's a great driver to watch as a result. Fun to watch. And what's the second part? And how is the driver managing the loads on the tyres during the race? Well, as I just described with Max, you can give Max a few driver aids. You can change the brake bias. You can give him more. You can give him more torque or whatever it is. And the strat stuff is usually power, isn't it? And harvesting. But you can do stuff in the corners as well. But it won't. But the great drivers won't necessarily just respond to that change. They will massage the car around the change they've just been given. And all that comes under the heading of tyre management. And great drivers naturally manage the tyres well. That is the point. And George Russell's a good example of that. I don't think George sits down and thinks, I want to be the greatest tyre management driver in Formula One. I think he thinks tyre management, like everybody else, is unbelievably boring. But because he's usually got the car pretty square everywhere, and makes his change of direction from a square starting point rather than a slightly loaded starting point, he's very good naturally on tyre management. And just as a short corner driver is. I mean, that's another way really of being good on tyre management. A short corner driver is he's got much more to play with than a George. A George's main thing is that he's just got this natural feel for the car to be square to the road. He hates to have the car slightly skewed, and he's very good at creating that. Whereas Max can have a car that's slightly skewed, but still have all four square to the road. That's the difference between a Max and a George, in my opinion. And he can do that because of the way he's constantly manipulating the steering, the throttle, and the brakes in a way that would not be evident on the telemetry. And in a way that would lead George, if he was watching this, to say, nah, that can't be possible. But it is, and that's why Max is so good, and that is why people don't understand why Max is so good. So if you can create that ability to manage the tires whilst the car is slightly skewed, then you've made it. If not, doing what George does is incredibly effective, and he's obviously one of the top drivers in the world. So we're only talking tiny, tiny differences here. But I would put Liam well below those two in that sense. You don't often see Liam with the tyres sitting as squarely as George has them, or as Isaac Hadjar has them, for that matter. That's the difference. And again, that doesn't show up on telemetry. All you're seeing is throttle input, steering input, brake input. You're not seeing the way Isaac actually gets the car just to be sucked to the road with a four corner square. He's very good. He's very good, Isaac Hadjar. And I think Oliver Behrman, as I say, has that George Russell touch. He definitely has that feel for having the car square. Obviously, he's young and still relatively inexperienced, and he's not always going to get it right, but he's not far away. He's really good as well. Darwin Life. Oh, there's a good name for you. Darwin. I've never been to Northern Territory. I'm going to have to end up in a second, guys. Sorry. Just looked at the time. Time flies, isn't it? Yeah, Darwin Life. A lot of time for NT though. Anyway, there you go. Darwin Life. Max was starting to get the upper hand, so Ricciardo ran to Reno. Well, that's right, But that was a silly thing for Ricciardo to do, to leave Red Bull. All those good people. Think about it now. Jonathan Wheatley, Adrian Newey, Rob Marshall. They were all there then. Pete Prod was probably still there. They were all there. All the people are now winning races for McLaren. They were all there. And Daniel Ricciardo walked away from that team because he didn't like getting beaten by Max Verstappen. And as Jonathan Wheatley said to Daniel before he ultimately made that decision to leave, as Jonathan Wheatley actually said to him, Daniel, you will win a world championship if you stay at Red Bull. You'll definitely win a lot more Grand Prix. Don't make this mistake. You're still doing things that are better than Max. He's got some shortcomings. Don't fall into the trap of just thinking you're going to be better off somewhere else. Don't do it. And guess who didn't listen? It's a shame. I mean, he's very good, Daniel. He definitely would have won a lot more Grand Prix. I don't know about a world championship, but he definitely would have won a lot more Grand Prix. Transporter 8. This is going to be the last question, I'm afraid, guys. What you said about Nigel having veal, I heard an interview with Dale Earnhardt, and he mentioned how Nigel was his favourite driver. Oh, well, there you go. I think it was Mark Martin once, and speaking of NASCAR drivers, and he was asked about his favourite driver. I said, oh, no doubt, Jim. I'm not allowed to do accents, sorry. No doubt, Jim Clark. I thought, wow, that's impressive. Mark Martin, Jim Clark, favourite driver. And here's Dale Earnhardt mentioning Nigel Mansell. And I think what Dale Earnhardt would see would be Nigel, this tough guy, tough in terms of being resilient, coming from nowhere, with most of the British press not rating him. And I say that because the British press were relatively influential in those days, as distinct from now, and defying all the logic that he was never going to make it, with no money, not many people around him rating him at all, none of the Formula One teams really rating him, Ron Dennis, who carried quite a lot of weight, not rating him at all, making it to Formula One and winning a world championship. It's a rocky story, and it's a story that needs to be told really properly, because many were the wasted days in Nigel's career. Not wasted by Nigel, but wasted by motorsport in not making sure this guy did have a proper racing car, or even a racing car at all, because we were robbed of a lot more stuff that we could have seen. Think about 1998, Nigel Mansell, sorry, 1978. I think I'm showing my age here, aren't I? Not forgetting things, but it's just like, it seems so recent. It must have had an 8 at the end of it. Oh no, it was actually 78. Anyway, 78. Think about Nigel mortgaging his house to buy for £30,000 5 races in a factory March Formula 3 car to prove his ability, having just won the Formula Ford Championship in the UK. And I think doing a pretty good job of proving his ability. He got a pole and he was leading a couple of races, didn't win any. And after the 5 races, bang, money was out, didn't drive a car again that year. Think about that. And the rest of that year, he was punching a punch bag in his garage and going out running in the rain in army boots and writing 10, 15 letters a day to potential sponsors in the best way that he could with his own handwriting. That's how much self-belief he had. That is what Ferenc Schisch actually is all about, coming from Hungary all the way to France, talking his way into the Renault factory, getting a job if you like, on the production line as a mechanic, and then cajoling the Renault brothers into giving him a run in the car to test the car, and then having them say, wow, you're quite good, come and do a race or two, and then winning the first ever French Grand Prix, the first Grand Prix. Ferenczi, Hungarian, whose plaque will be there, as I say, as the Formula One people walk through the paddock gates for the Hungarian Grand Prix this weekend, and I hope they all just give him a little nod of approval of what he did. Anyway, there we go. Back with more, obviously, as this Hungarian Grand Prix weekend gathers pace. As I say, at the moment, looks like it's going to be a dry weekend. A bit of a shame, really, isn't it? Let's see if the thunderclouds appear again on any of the forecasts before long. In the meantime, big thanks to Jetcraft, to TrackNinja, to REC Watches, and of course to OEM Exclusive for their support of this channel, and to you, the viewer and the listener, for your support as well. Without you, these live streams wouldn't be happening. So a big thanks to you for all that. See you soon.